Hey diddly hi-ho, this is Norm and welcome back. Thank you very much for returning after the last one. As anticipated, I've got another art stream going today, and unlike the last one, I actually do know what I'm working on in this one because I recorded it before I recorded the audio this time, which is probably the smarter thing to do. This one is a loose cartoon interpretation of the old Chinese shopkeeper from Gremlins. Having just taken a moment to look up the character's name was Mr. Wing. Presumably a nom de plume from his string of chicken restaurants. Now, when I say that this is a loose cartoon interpretation, I mean two things with it. First, it's very loose because I'm actually not very good at drawing actual people, like specific human actors. And I realize that is a pretty substantial failing as an artist. But remember that Rob Liefeld had a very successful career without being able to draw feet, hands, torsos. About 95% of the human body, he was winging it. In any case, the other part of the loose interpretation is that these are more or less sketches. They are going to be used in a product, but it is kind of a throwaway gag product, so I'm not cleaning up anything that I'm doing here. Now, the smarty pants among you may make a note that there is a lighter sketch underneath what I'm doing right here. I'm not tracing, but I did previously go in and block out the general line work that I was going to be putting inking on because the blocking out portion of it does not make for good cinema. There's a lot of erasing, a lot of resizing. I pretty much just cut it out for entertainment's sake. If you really want to see that part of the process, I don't know what to tell you. I didn't record it. Anyway, moving on. A couple of days ago, as of this recording, this would be on January the 25th, Xbox hosted the first Developer Direct. Kind of their answer to the Nintendo Direct or the PlayStation, the Sony State of Play. Taken as a whole, it was alright. I'll confess that none of the games on there, with the exception of Redfall, none of the games were I following very closely. I'm trying to think of the exact lineup there. It looks like the first one was Minecraft Legends. That's fine, I guess. I honestly skipped ahead in the feed. The next one was Forza Motorsport. Now, I will confess I am not a racing fan. I'm not a sports game fan in general, but I do like to follow, particularly early in a console cycle. And I realize that the Series X, the Series S, those have been out for a while, but for all intents and purposes, because of the strange way that the hardware has been adopted this cycle with the console shortages and the overwhelming support for the previous generation, I still consider this kind of technically in the early days of the hardware cycle. But anyways, in the early days of the hardware cycle, you look to the sports games, the racing games. Those are kind of your metric for where the graphics technology is headed because they are such restricted play styles compared to something like Elder Scrolls or GTA, where you're going to be jumping around through 7 different control schemes, play styles, a lot more world interaction on those. So the fact that sports games, racing games, really only do one thing, it allows the devs to concentrate, to really optimize for that specific style of gameplay, and in the process squeeze out a lot more graphics processing than some of the more scattershot gameplay styles will allow before everybody gets the hang of the hardware. And that was very much what they were focused on showing during the Forza segment. Dirt, damage, ray tracing, all the little graphical bells and whistles, because that was the novel part. It's Forza, it's racing. They're not going to pull anything really surprising out of the hat there. The sport itself really kind of restricts you from doing much more than going from point A to point B. The next game in the presentation, though, was actually a surprise. It was Hi-Fi Rush from Tango Gameworks. With the exception of a few Reddit leakers, This was the first, I think, they've mentioned mentioned anything about this game in public, and in kind of a shocking move, they released it same day on Game Pass. A shocking move, but very smart. The reason being that this was a mid-tier, a double-A effort. Very interesting art style. It's got the toon-shaded filter, and they have dropped the frame rate on the individual characters' animation versus the game itself. I think the game looks like it's running at 60, but the character animation appears to be running, at least in the cutscenes, at around 12 frames per second, not unlike in Spider-Man Enter the Multiverse, or I'll have to look up the title. Hang on. Spider-Man Enter the... Okay, it's not throwing me up anyway. Oh, no. The Spider-Verse. Spider-Man Enter the Spider-Verse. Can't imagine how I forgot that part. Anyway, it looks like they were trying successfully to emulate the emotions of that film. It's a very distinct visual look. It does not look much like anything else that's come out recently. The gameplay is a rhythm beat 'em up, which is novel enough. You don't see a lot of those. But the smart thing about it is that because this wasn't really intended as any kind of like a blockbuster AAA, knock him out of their... I was trying to decide between seats and pants to knock him out of. Socks. Anyway, because it was not intended as any kind of a real shake the ground type announcement, it was incredibly smart of them to release it same day, because if it was just released, if they announced it here, then 6 months down the road after a couple of previews, I don't think they would have gotten the same reaction. I like, for instance, myself, I actually tried it on Game Pass same day. It's all right. It's not a game I'm going to stick with, but that alone is not strong condemnation. It's not that I'm a game snob. It's that I have very, very little time, and unless a game absolutely puts its hooks into me, I don't stick with them as a rule. But it was a very smart move, particularly in the new, I would assume, gameplay metrics-driven environment of Game Pass, to release this game shortly after people knew it existed, while it was still forefront in their brain. As a person who has personally been burned by the algorithm more times than I care to mention, I imagine you're going to be seeing a lot more games taking up this model of release, particularly for indie titles. Well, I take that back. Not necessarily for indie titles, because they are going to be a small group of dedicated people who are probably not going to keep their yap shut in trying to gum up some support for their game, but probably in the AA sector, you're going to be seeing a lot more releases along these lines, where there are literal hours between the announcement and the release. It just makes it so much more likely that somebody will even try the game. And as somebody who grew up in an era where every game release, it didn't matter what it was, every game release was considered notable to one extent or another, even terrible ones. If you were following games in the 90s, you probably knew every game that was coming out. Even if you had no intention of playing it, you were probably aware on some level that the game existed. Even if it was a patently, obviously terrible game, something was going to be hitting like a 3.0 from Game Informer, you would still at least have some idea that game was going to be releasing. You'd probably even know when it was releasing. There would still be an article or two written about it. That is not a luxury that modern games have. As bizarre as it is to think about, when you consider that any game, doesn't matter what it is, big, small, any game takes a ridiculous amount of effort to get out the door. And increasingly, we are seeing people who, after they've spent, poured 2-3 years of their lives into this thing, taking up all their blood, sweat, and tears, they drop it, and it's immediately forgotten, if noticed at all. So, yes, for good or ill, in the modern world, I guarantee you're going to be seeing more of these stealth drops, particularly for Game Pass releases. As for the game itself, like I said, it's alright, worth a try. You may get more out of it than I did. I don't think it's a bad game, just I don't have the patience for it. Also, the name of the game reminded me that Bomb Rush Cyberfunk still hasn't come out, and I'm really looking forward to that one. They also showed off at the Developer Direct a new expansion for Elder Scrolls Online, and I had the same reaction whenever they announce anything regarding Elder Scrolls Online, which is that my ears perked up at the words Elder Scrolls, and my brain shut down at online. This is another case where the game itself is probably perfectly fine. I've actually heard a lot of people who enjoy Elder Scrolls Online, but it's clearly, utterly not for me, and that would be perfectly fine if it was named anything but Elder Scrolls Online. As it is, it's just a big, obnoxious flag waving in my face, letting me know that I'm not going to be playing an actual Elder Scrolls game for another probably 6 to 10 years. And finally, the last game shown at the Developer Direct was Arcane Studios' Redfall. I have been following news on Redfall pretty closely because I like almost all of Arcane's other works. This one I definitely felt a lot more iffy about, and I still kinda do. There's a lot of elements about this that I do kinda like. I like that they likened that the developers, when in an interview, I like that they likened the game to Far Cry rather than Left 4 Dead. The Far Cry series, as much guff as I give Ubisoft in general for being Ubisoft, the Far Cry series has a very engaging gameplay loop. I find the act of slowly turning a map from red to blue to be satisfying. I like the methodical piecemeal going bit by bit across the map, just changing it one at a time. Even the checklist nature of it, I enjoy. But with that said, that's what I've always enjoyed about the Far Cry series, not about Arcane games. And when I say Arcane games, I'm pretty much talking about the Dishonored series. I played a little bit of Deathloop. I want to play more. I haven't gotten around to it. But the Dishonored series has such amazing world building and atmosphere, and so far I really haven't seen that on display in Redfall. In fact, not to be too harsh on it, but what I have seen about the human element in the atmosphere is disturbingly close to a Ubisoft game, and that's not something you want. To one degree or another, every Ubisoft character is rapping grandma. Horrible stock characters, paper thin, made to be shown in a freeze frame during a Sunny D commercial. And I'm not saying that's what they're going to be in Redfall. The thing is, they really haven't shown the characters or the story at all. What I've seen of the characters, I pretty much just remember from the initial reveal trailer, and they were all just these Ubisoft jump cuts to the wacky characters and their hijinks. And you just kind of took it on faith that they were going to be fleshed out later in some of the marketing materials, and that really hasn't happened. Pretty much everything they've shown has had to do with mostly with the combat. And while Arcane has pioneered quite a few novel methods of combat, particularly in the Dishonored series, as I get old, combat is rapidly becoming the least interesting part of any game. I'm not saying all games should be non-violent, like pacifist vegan games. I'm saying that combat in general has been refined to a point, in the general gameplay sense, across the vast landscape of video games entire, gameplay has kind of gotten refined. Combat has gotten refined to the point that by default it's pretty good. And because it is pretty good, because the baseline now is combat is pretty good, there's really not much point in dwelling on it anymore. I like that it works. I like that you can shake it up a little bit and, use a different type of ammo or squish people slightly differently. But at the same time, when it comes to marketing materials, it's like trying to push a new variety of white rice. Not saying rice is bad, I'm saying we get the idea. It's like at the Starfield gameplay demonstration they showed. Holy smokes, was that back in last summer? Anyway, the one that they made such a big deal about the complaints about the combat in the first section, how it looked kind of anemic, and it did. They're absolutely right. It did not show nearly the level of reactivity from the NPCs that you'd expect to see from that kind of gameplay. But at the same time, even if the gunplay had been fantastic, I would have still been tapping my feet to get to the other parts. I was even more on board when I found out that they had a slightly different lock-picking minigame this time. Speaking of Starfield, we did not get any word on Starfield, which is that at the beginning of when they first announced the show, they told us that Starfield was not going to be at the Developer Direct. So I wasn't disappointed when I didn't hear anything about Starfield, but at the same time, there's that little childlike glimmer of hope that they were going to pull a Columbo moment and stop, one more thing, end the show with like a see you in April for the Starfield premiere or something along those lines. They have already announced that there is going to be a dedicated Starfield show at some point between now and summer. And okay, fine. Doesn't mean it would kill him to throw us a bone. Anyway, that was the Developer Direct. Good format for the show. I presume that there are going to be more coming. There are theoretically a lot more games coming out on the Xbox this year, so they should have more to talk about. But for my part, I think that's about all I'm going to be covering today. If you enjoyed this video, go ahead, subscribe, hit the notification button. If you're already subscribed, make sure you do hit the notification button because, as you can see, most of the people who subscribe literally never see these. We'll have more videos coming out in the near future along these lines, and of course the regular cartoon work, which is, you can see, is in progress. You can, of course, support the work directly on the Patreon. Link is below. And with that, I will say goodbye until the next installment. This has been Norm Scott. Y'all take care. Like the video gamers? We have more such wonders to show you, and all you have to do is subscribe and hit the notifications button.
I mean, you don't have to.
Also consider becoming a patron by following the link to our Patreon page, where we turn your cash into videos, comics, and games using the darkest of dark magics.
But mostly just cash.